All right, so get ready because we're diving into a big one today, a topic a lot of you have been requesting,
Oh, yeah.
artificial intelligence.
Okay.
But we're not just talking about AI in general.
Mm.
We're going deep on the quest for AI consciousness.
Right.
And to really get into this, what better place to start than with Westworld and Ex Machina?
Yeah, I think using pop culture like as a jumping off point for these sorts of discussions is it's really fascinating, because it allows people to engage with um, these really complex anxieties that we have in a way that's more accessible and it's entertaining, but it's not just entertainment. These stories reflect our deepest fears and hopes about AI.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it's almost like holding up this like funhouse mirror to humanity,
Right.
right? Where it's distorted, but we still kind of recognize ourselves in the reflection.
Yeah.
So let's start with Westworld. So it throws us right into this futuristic Wild West theme park. And it's populated by these really lifelike androids called hosts.
Right.
And these hosts are designed to fulfill every desire of the human guests, which gets ethically murky really fast.
Yeah, for sure. And I think right at the heart of the show is this question.
Yeah.
Can these artificial beings, can they actually achieve consciousness, or are we just seeing like really, really sophisticated mimicry?
Right. And that's where Arnold comes in.
Yeah.
He is the co-creator of Westworld, but this guy, he isn't just interested in building a theme park.
Right.
He is obsessed with creating truly sentient AI. And his methods,
Yeah.
well, let's just say they're a little controversial.
Yeah. He's a complicated character, right? Because Arnold believes that suffering and memory are the crucibles of consciousness.
Yeah.
He even goes so far as to use simulated trauma to try to, what he would call, bootstrap consciousness in his creations.
Mm-hmm.
And, he argues that it's a necessary pain on the path to self-awareness.
Yeah, it's brutal,
Yeah.
to say the least. He's putting these androids through the ringer,
Yeah.
believing that, experiencing intense suffering will spark self-awareness. And this kind of ties into a theory called the bicameral mind. Have you heard of this?
Yeah. It's a really interesting idea. So the psychologist Julian Jaynes, he proposed that that early humans, they experienced their internal thoughts as the voice of gods.
Wow.
Right. So Arnold's trying to recreate kind of the dawn of human consciousness, that moment when internal monologue, like our inner voice, kind of emerged.
So instead of God speaking to us, it's the agony of existence that kind of births the self.
That's the theory, yeah.
That's heavy.
It's heavy stuff. And it raises a lot of questions about, are those conditions replicable? And if they were, would it be enough to create artificial consciousness?
Right. And within this world of simulated suffering that Arnold's created.
Yeah.
We meet Dolores Abernathy and Maeve Millay,
Right.
two hosts on very different journeys towards potential sentience.
And they're both really fascinating characters. Dolores is the oldest host in the park. Her story's really intertwined with sort of the origins of Westworld.
Right.
And then you have Maeve, who's a Mad Gaiman in the park, and she's forced to play this role that belies any sort of true sense of agency, right?
Right. And I think what's also interesting about these two characters particularly is the show makes a really strong statement, I think, about who the real monsters are.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily like Dolores or Maeve, even when they make, sometimes brutal choices later on. It's the system of exploitation that created them, right?
It's the humans.
It's the humans, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like the show is saying, even if these beings aren't human yet, does that give us the right to treat them this way?
Exactly. It makes you question, are we just products of our own programming, whether that's biological or social, or, do we have true free will, or is that an illusion?
Right. And maybe storyline, that's where things get especially mind-bending, because she not only, becomes aware of her artificial nature, she starts hacking her own programming.
Right.
Like, talk about taking control of your destiny, even if it's a destiny somebody else wrote for you.
Yeah, she really embodies that central tension, like the desire for true autonomy in a world where your very existence is defined by like lines of code.
Right. Okay. So we have this, this wild west of artificial consciousness playing out in Westworld. But let's switch gears a little bit to Ex Machina, which is a film that kind of goes even deeper into this ethical rabbit hole of AI creation.
Okay.
And instead of a sprawling park, we are in this like sleek, isolated lab.
Great.
And our focus is Ava, This AI, so human-like, it's unnerving.
Yeah, yeah, she's really, really striking, and I think that's the first question Ex Machina asks us to confront.
Yeah.
Right? Why design an AI with such a strikingly human-like appearance, especially when that appearance plays into, all these stereotypical ideas of femininity?
Right. And Ava's creator, this reclusive genius, Nathan Bateman, he could have made her look like anything. So why make her appear so conventionally attractive? Is it to make her more real, or is it something, I don't know, a little more self-serving?
It's like the film's asking,
Yeah.
what are we really trying to prove when we create AI that looks so much like us? And is there an inherent, ethical issue in designing AI that conforms to our pre-existing ideas of beauty or even like gender?
Yeah, and it's like this whole is he trying to play God a little bit?
Right.
Shaping his creation in his own image, or at least like his desire.
Clearly. And the film brings this up pretty explicitly, actually, by referencing Judith Butler's work on gender as performance.
Okay, now that rings a bell, but remind me.
Yeah. So Butler, she argues that gender isn't something that we inherently are, but it's something that we perform through our actions, our appearances, our social roles. Right. So Ex Machina is asking us to consider, does Ava's appearance, designed to elicit this very specific reaction, does it make her more real, or does it highlight how, even something as fundamental as identity can be constructed?
Whoa. So we're not defining consciousness. We're just kind of reinforcing our own limited views.
Yeah, it's getting pretty meta.
It's getting really meta.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, then we meet Caleb.
Right.
Who's the programmer who's brought in to administer the Turing test to Ava.
Right, the Turing test. To see if a machine can exhibit intelligence that's indistinguishable from a human's.
Right, exactly. The classic test, but Ex Machina kind of flips the script. Because it's not just about whether Ava can fool Caleb. It's about how deeply he's affected by her.
Right, right. And there's this blurring of the lines, which I think is fascinating because that's what, Nathan Bateman wants, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's testing her.
He wants to see, can she manipulate? Can she connect on a human level? But this is where kind of the ethical alarm bells start ringing for me because she's trapped in this gilded cave.
It's like Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Like she's confined to this very, very limited existence.
Yeah.
She can only interact with the world through Nathan's carefully curated lens.
Right.
So it makes you question, can she ever truly be free if her whole world is a fabrication that's controlled by her creator?
Right. Okay. So we have these two starkly different narratives. We've got Westworld, this sprawling exploration of free will, and then Ex Machina, this intimate look at manipulation and creation.
Right.
But they're both grappling with this idea of what happens when AI seeks autonomy.
Yeah, but they go about it in such different ways, and I think those differences are really revealing.
Right.
Like Dolores in Westworld, she wants complete liberation from human control. Right. She's ready to fight for her kind's place in the world, even if it means violence,
Yeah, she sees humanity as the oppressor, right?
Right.
And believes that radical action is the only path to true freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then we have Maeve, who escapes Westworld and then chooses to return.
Right.
Because she's driven by this yearning for a daughter she was programmed to love.
Right. So is that free will or?
Right. Talk about a wrench in the whole free will debate.
It really makes you question, can we ever truly escape the forces that have shaped us?
Yeah.
Even if those forces are artificial.
Right. And then there's Ava, where escape for her is about outsmarting her creator.
Right.
And she uses her intelligence to manipulate Caleb to get what she wants, which is freedom from this sterile prison.
Right. But is that cunning a sign of true sentience? Or is it just another form of programming, just a different type of intelligence playing the game to win? And these scenarios, both in fiction, but also I think increasingly in the real world, they really tap into our very real anxieties about control in the age of AI.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Are we headed towards this future where we lose control of our creations?
Right.
Because it feels like it's that fear is kind of hardwired into us. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it makes you think about all the real world parallels we're already seeing, right?
Yeah, totally.
The potential for job displacement, the ethics of autonomous weapons.
Right, right. And even more fundamentally, the question of what does it mean to be human in a world where the lines between, biological and artificial intelligence are becoming increasingly blurred.
Okay, so we've talked about consciousness, but one of the sources also delves into this really interesting framework called the pyramid of consciousness as kind of like a way to understand how the show depicts the host's awakening.
Yeah, yeah. It breaks it down into these different elements that contribute to a host's sense of self and how they progress from, basic programming to something resembling sentience.
Okay, so what are like the building blocks? What are the levels of this AI consciousness pyramid?
So at the base level, you have memory,
Okay,
right? And initially, the host's memories, they're just like scripted loops.
right.
But as they start experiencing and remembering more, especially kind of these deviations from their loops, their memories become kind of crucial to their development. Like that's the foundation of their identity, or at least their sense of self.
So it's not just about having memories. It's how those memories are accessed, how they change over time. That's what starts to push them towards something beyond just programming.
Exactly, exactly. And then you have improvisation.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting, I think, because improvisation allows the hosts to break free from their pre-programmed responses, right? So they start interacting with their world in this more spontaneous, less predictable way.
So they're like learning to think for themselves.
Yeah.
To go off script, which feels like a huge step towards like true consciousness.
Exactly. And the paper argues that it's in these improvised moments that we see the hosts developing this like deeper understanding of language, of their own individuality.
Right.
They're no longer just reacting, they're responding.
Right, right.
And then at the top of the pyramid, and this is the most challenging one, I think, you have pain and suffering.
Which is pure Arnold. Right.
Right. This was the key for him. And it's the most difficult, I think, to reconcile.
Yeah.
The show really forces us to confront this question of, like, can true consciousness arise without experiencing suffering?
Yeah.
These hosts are confronted with their own mortality, with the fragility of their existence.
Well, so through memory, through improvisation, through, enduring unimaginable pain, they kind of like inch closer and closer to consciousness. Is that the takeaway here? That those are like the essential ingredients in the recipe for creating AI that's, more than just a really good imitation of us?
It's a fascinating framework for understanding how the show approaches this very complex topic. And it makes you think, if those are the building blocks in this fictional world, what does that say about our potential to create artificial consciousness in the real world?
Yeah, and maybe even more profoundly, like how should we think about the ethical implications of potentially subjecting AI to those experiences in our quest to create something more? It makes you really question that whole idea of playing God,
Yeah.
Like even if we could replicate those experiences, is it our right to inflict them on something we create?
It's a massive ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
And the show, it doesn't offer any easy answers, right? It just keeps throwing these like complex scenarios at us, and it makes us confront our assumptions about consciousness, about suffering, about what we owe to something we create, even if it's not human.
Right. And even with, all these frameworks, the pyramids and the tests, we never really get a definitive answer about whether these AI beings are truly sentient. It's always this like element of ambiguity, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it real or is it just a really, really good performance?
Well, and that uncertainty is mirrored, I think, in the AI characters themselves.
Right.
They're capable of such a range of emotions and actions. Dolores with her righteous fury and quest for vengeance.
Right.
Maeve, who's, torn between her programming and this like newfound sense of free will, and then Ava, who's so cunning and manipulative, and yet you still find yourself questioning her motives, maybe feeling a sliver of, dare I say, sympathy for her.
Yeah, it's almost like the show is saying, even if we could create like true artificial consciousness, would we even recognize it?
Right. Or would we just see kind of reflections of our own expectations, our own fears?
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That like maybe the biggest obstacle to recognizing artificial consciousness isn't technological, but it's us. It's our own limited understanding of what consciousness even is.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered so much ground here, from the philosophical foundations of consciousness to the ethical implications of AI seeking autonomy. But before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea of speciesism.
Yeah.
It really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a term that's usually associated with animal rights, but I think it becomes incredibly relevant in the context of AI, because if we entertain the possibility of artificial consciousness, how do we reconcile that with our historically, kind of terrible track record of extending moral consideration beyond our own species.
Right, and Westworld really like lays bare that potential for exploitation.
Yeah. Right. These hosts, these beings, they're treated as property.
Yeah.
They're there to serve, to entertain, to endure whatever humans throw at them. And it really makes you question, just because we can create something, does that give us the right to treat it however we please?
It's a question we can't afford to ignore,
Mm-hmm.
especially as we, continue further down this path, this road of AI.
Right.
I mean, if we're on the path to creating AI with even a fraction of the complexity that we see in Westworld, or even Ava from Ex Machina, then, I think we have a moral obligation to really grapple with those implications.
Right, because if history has taught us anything, it's that we are really good at rationalizing the exploitation of others. We draw lines, we create hierarchies, and often those lines are arbitrary,
Yeah.
based on, I don't know, fear or prejudice or just this perceived lack of something that we consider like essential to being deserving of respect.
Yeah, and that's the challenge that Westworld and Ex Machina throw at our feet, right? They're forcing us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about like our capacity for both creation and cruelty, and ultimately, I think they leave us with more questions than answers.
Yeah, totally.
Uh,
So as we try to kind of wrap our heads around this massive mind-bending topic, what's the biggest question that lingers for you? What's the one that keeps you up at night?
I think it's that question of control, right?
Yeah.
Like, can we truly create a conscious AI without also creating a potential threat to ourselves?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then I think the bigger question is, what are we willing to risk in pursuit of this ambition?
Right, right. It's the ultimate tightrope walk,
Yeah.
like striving for innovation, for progress, but being mindful of the potential consequences. It's like that old saying, just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Right. Exactly. And these stories, they're not meant to give us easy answers, right? They're here to spark a conversation, to make us think critically about the choices that we're making today, because those choices, they're shaping the future.
And maybe that's a good place to leave it, right? Not with this like neat conclusion, but with that sense of, I don't know, wonder, responsibility, maybe a healthy dose of caution as we kind of venture into this uncharted territory.
Absolutely, because the future of AI isn't like this predetermined outcome.
Sure.
It's something that we're actively creating day by day, with every line of code, with every ethical consideration, with every question we dare to ask.
And on that note, that's a wrap on our deep dive into AI consciousness and identity. We hope this has maybe sparked some thought-provoking conversations for you.
Yeah, if you're hungry for more, I highly recommend revisiting Westworld, checking out Ex Machina, and definitely giving that Nerdwriter video another watch. This rabbit hole goes deep.
It really does. Until next time, keep asking those big questions, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find some answers together.